Good morning, everybody. Just to say I'm delighted to be here this morning, and thank you very much to my colleagues for suggesting I do this talk. I wasn't really sure it was a good idea at the time, but I suppose I'm here now, so we'll see how it goes. Just to say, this work has been prepared with my colleague, Dr. Rosemary Cross, and she's been a great help in getting this together, and this is our talk. So if I slip into I along the way, it's we, is what I'm saying. So up in front of you is a picture of, on the left-hand side is the front cover of Nola Kennedy's book, Cottage to Crest, from 2001. And it was the first attempt really to kind of get a handle on family change in Ireland at a serious intellectual level. And I tried to follow it up in 2011 with a paper that built on, I suppose, her approach, really, and she emphasised three kind of pillars, if you want. She talked about economy, she talked about policy and politics, and she talked about values. And I suppose I'd like you to think maybe a little bit about those ideas as we go through the talk today, and think about how they feature in your understanding of family and family change in Ireland. And just to say thanks to Bahira for the presentation, because I'll be saying a lot of the same things, but hopefully at a level that fits to your specific understanding in the Irish context. So the aim of the talk is to provide a case study on family change and continuity in Ireland, and really it's about to try to inform the deliberations, to give a little bit of detail, a little bit of specificity, to offer a framework for your own reflections on the meaning and significance of family. And maybe just to pick up a point that Bahira made about emotion, and it's really an interesting point, because family straight away brings and evokes ideas and feelings are where our values come from. So it's important to recognise it, but at the same time, as Bahira said, family is about facts, it's about objective realities as well. We need to understand those. And the final point, and maybe this is, if you want, my subtext, maybe it's not a subtext, it's really to think about family as an explicit focus in social policy development and implementation into the future. And that's an argument I'm going to try to make as we go through. So the structure, this introduction and context, we're going to look at family change. We're going to talk about what I regard as a services crisis. And I don't use that term lightly. And then we'll have a summary and conclusion. And just to say, there is a strong caveat here. Really, it is a dominant heterosexual family narrative. And that's because that's what the data and the policy speaks to. That's what's available to us. But we have an emerging context of same-sex partnerships, families, and children in those situations. And we have to start to begin to understand those things and engage with them meaningfully over time. But I would say that is a limitation of the talk today. So why do families matter? Well, because of the nature and significance of family as a social institution. Families are formative for who we are as individuals, as citizens, as future family members. And critically for a lot of us in the room, families are the context within which adversities are played out. They might arise in families, and certainly they are played out in family contexts. And they're the context within which most help is given, support provided, and solutions found. So they really are important. Critically, they're the source of most care. An important word. We talk about economy all the time. We need to start talking about care. I go back to 2 years ago at our conference, and we had similar messages. But of course, family is central to policy. What is it? It's the state, it's the market, it's the non-profit, and it's family. How strong is family? What's left to family to do? And of course, in Ireland, we've got this incredibly strong constitutional position, which gives women a particular role at the moment, which is something that the predominantly female audience would have some thoughts on, no doubt. But family matters. So I'm going to go through a lot of slides, a lot of data today, a lot of secondary data from various sources, and I'll try to point you in the direction of the things I want you to look at, okay? So the green arrow, this is from our own work in relation to prevention and early intervention. And the question was about who would respondents ask for help with a parenting problem if they couldn't manage? And who do people say that they would turn to? They would turn to the immediate family, 74% of cases, and extended family as the 28 so on percent. So you can see the significance of family in terms of help provision in that respect. The next couple of slides are around, I suppose, the relationship between 10 and 17-year-olds and their parents. And it's from the health behaviour in school-aged children research that was carried out by the health promotion people in our university here, Saoirse Nagown and colleagues. So I'd like you to look at the left-hand side, 1998, and the right-hand side, 2014. And if you look at the blue bar, if you look at the green bar, you can see a change from 73% to 82%. So there's an increase in the number of 10 to 17-year-olds who feel they can talk to their mother about things that really bother them. That's a really interesting point to see over time, the relationship, the capacity to engage with our parents. Now, when we look at this from the point of view of talking to dads, it's the bars are lower, as you can see. However, the trend is similarly in the right direction, and the increase is more dramatic, going from 74 to 47, should I say, to 75%. So you can see this big change in the degree to which children can talk to their dads, lower than their moms, but still an important point. So in terms of, and I'll refer to it later on, the significant investment by the Irish state on understanding families and children's lives is really a boon to the likes of us here. This is from the Growing Up in Ireland study, and this is from 13-year-olds, their views on their interactions with their parents. It's from 2012, I think, the red arrow. I can count on my parent to help me out if I have a problem. 83% of 13-year-olds feel that this is the case in relation to their mum, and 76% in relation to their dad. And here we're talking about 17 and 18-year-olds, and this is from 2016. What are the kinds of things that matter to the 17 and 18-year-olds? What's important in their lives? The highest rating, 5.7%, parents and siblings. And again, if you look at the other red arrow, one's own family and children. So family matters to people. Family matters to children, certainly. But family is problematic. And I was trying to come up with the terminology, so I've come up with the word outwashing. I don't know, is it a word, is it a good word or a bad word? But what we have is we've an extended outwashing of the consequences of the Irish State's alliances with the Catholic Church over the last 30 years, and all of the things that go with that. And there's many, many books that can be written about it, and I'm not going to talk about it. But the reality of it is that family is a source of suffering for a significant minority of people. And that's a continuum from being unhappy and in conflict situations, from being in contexts where there is child abuse happening in your family and where you're suffering domestic violence, and where, and Shane is going to talk to us later about addiction, and where people are suffering from various addictions and so on. And again, as Bahira said, from a feminist point of view, either theoretically or from an advocacy point of view, that family is the basis potentially of patriarchal control of women by men. To give us some kind of sense of this in terms of the numbers, on the left-hand side, these are current referrals to child protection services in Ireland. We're looking at 5,000 children, 5,000 referrals in March. So again, that's a kind of a steady enough figure. On the right-hand side, the number of children who can't live with their families. And we're looking at 6,000. Interesting, nice to see a bit of a decline, hopefully from the prevention side of the house. Also note within that stat, relative foster care as a significant proportion. So again, family is a form within which alternative care is provided, and that tells us something. Domestic violence services, top left-hand corner, 50,000 helpline calls were answered by domestic violence services across Ireland in 2016, and help provided to 10,000 women. So again, let's not kid ourselves about family. Let's not get sentimental about family, okay? Let's be clear about that. And also, family is hard to define. And I'm dodging it today. I'm not going to talk about it. But because it's hard to define, it's hard to measure, and that becomes problematic. For all these reasons, maybe policymakers in Ireland, they kind of want to step away a little bit from family as something. And this is what Fahy and Nixon say in 2013. They say it's probably true to say at present family does not really serve as an influential organising concept in Irish policymaking. It is currently less forceful in that context than the concern with children. We can all sign up to children, I think. We find it far more difficult to sign up to family. And again, in terms of what family policy is then, it's a loose array of distributive measures, i.e. money, services, regulatory frameworks. And again, it's not a single integrated field of activity. Okay, so that's the first bit. That's about setting it up. So what about what's changed then? So I'm going to talk about values change. I'm going to talk about change in key areas, okay? Fertility, formation, work, poverty, and diversity. We're going to look at values change for a second. Recent referenda. Children's Rights Referendum 2012. 58-42. Same-sex marriage, 2015, 62-38. Abortion, 2018, 66-34. Divorce, 2019, 82-18. So the quote, I think the quote is from Elkin and colleagues, and it's in relation to same-sex marriage, but I think it tells the story. First of all, I suppose it talks about a change in values that's generational, but it also says that Irish citizens are becoming more liberal and the conservative base has shrunk to a one-third minority. And this is important for me because I think it frees us up potentially in terms of how we think about family and all the baggage maybe of the past. And maybe it might mean and can mean something different into the future. But that's a question. So, fertility. As Bahir has said, we're looking at changes and reductions in total fertility rates. This is the Irish story, and it has a decline. If we start in 1960, but a high point in 1965 of 4.03, very, very high. We were out of the kilter with our European colleagues even at that stage, and it's in decline now, and it's below replacement rate in 2016. So it's really important point about, well, if there are fewer children being born, what happens to society? And therefore, immigration becomes really important, which is an important point for diversity and so on and so forth. All of these things connect. Again, how do we compare? We're actually high, but look at the countries that are high. So a country that's very high here is a country that commits to lots of family support, lots of provision, extensive state intervention. It's Sweden. It's also a society that emphasises equality. So fertility and equality, they can go together. Look at France. France has a very strong pro-natalist approach. We're up there in terms of we still have high fertility. So what are the things that have changed fertility? Well, one of the things that we've all talked about, and there's kind of this anecdotal stuff out and about. These slides come from work by Margaret Fine Davis in TCD, and it's a survey of people aged between 20 and 49. And it's all about gender roles and so on, and family formation. But I want you to refer you to the green arrows again, and just highlight the extent to which economy and money connects to family and making decisions about actually forming families. So the effect of the cost of living, and also whether or not you're going to have more families. And again, there is a question here about in the future, will it be more likely that people who have bigger families are wealthier? So again, moving on to family formation and dissolution. So again, the picture here is of a civil ceremony. So I think in 2018, 60% of marriage ceremonies were within religious contexts, and 40% were outside. There were spiritual, humanist, and civil ceremonies. That's a massive, massive change in terms of how we think about that part of it. And yet, marriage matters for people. What does it matter for people? Well, it provides security and stability, and people say it's a crucial part of society. So again, strong support for marriage within this data from Fine Davis. What do we see about when people get married again? But here is data. It matches it. We see this increase at age of the bride and groom. So Ireland, we go back to 1965 here. Traditionally in Ireland, what we had late marriage and high fertility in marriage. And now what we have is we've late marriage and lower fertility, but still, in comparison, relatively high with other countries. The number of families has increased in Ireland, and they're the light blue bars. So if you track them over, and that reflects, I suppose, the increase in the population. But look at the dark blue line, and what we see is the average number of children in families has fallen over the period from 1996 to 2016. So this is a significant change. But Bahir is correct in terms of Ireland stands out from other countries because of the high number of families with 3 or more children. We still are an outlier in that respect. What kind of families do we have? Well, I would refer you to the top, to the pie chart on the left-hand side, and just look for a second at one-parent families. Almost 20% of our families are headed by one parent. Really, really important point when we think about family support and pressures on families and so on, and poverty and all of the issues that go along with this. If you look on the bottom there, we're looking at 150,000 cohabiting couples. So cohabitation has increased. It increased less actually in the last period between 11 and 16 than it did in the previous intercensal period. And again, children in that, an average number of children of 0.9. So about 50% of cohabiting couples have children. Again, we can see big change, same-sex couples, it's about in the region of 6,000, and again, there are about 600 couples who have children, and the majority of these are women. So again, we can see big changes in terms of, I suppose, while a minority group, the fact of this is a major change in Irish society. So what about dissolution? As people know, we've had a recent referendum, and it has reduced wait time for divorce. I started pulling data from the Court Services report for teaching purposes a number of years ago, and I kept at it just to see, well, applications received and applications granted. And what we see here is, if I was to spread that out over time, it would be a relatively flat graph. What we see really is that actually the level of divorce in Ireland has been pretty steady since 2002. Not any majors, no trend upwards as such. Now behind this there's probably another story around separation and so on and so forth. Tony Fahey called it a small bang, and we can speculate as to the reasons why. In austerity, people might argue, well, actually it was too costly to start a divorce and to actually pay for a solicitor and so on and so forth. It's one of the reasons. Again, I don't know if that stacks up empirically. What does it result in? There's about 211,000 people who are separated and divorced in Ireland, according to the 2016 census. And again, within that, I don't know the figure for children that are in those families, but we can imagine a significant number. Again, looking at the divorce rate, comparatively, the crude divorce rate per 1,000 is 0.8. I think it's the lowest. We're alongside Malta, who we... Yes, I was going to say we beat in soccer, but that was Gibraltar, so I got mixed up there. But Malta has similar Catholic background and culture. So very quickly on diversity, just some stats. This is from the census 2016, and I refer you to the broken pie over here, and the figures might be a bit hard to read, but I want to refer you particularly to the top nationalities. And in 2016, for the first time, the largest other nationality living in Ireland was Polish people. 122,000 Polish people, and overtook people from the UK for the first time. But again, if you look again, Lithuanian, Romanian, and so on, and Brazilian, and a big shout out to Melissa, people from Brazil, a significant part of our population. The other thing I'd refer to on this slide is the mixed Irish and non-Irish households, standing at around 134,000 people. So again, you have this significant increase and this big change in terms of the makeup of the population. I don't know if people know, Galway is very diverse. I think it is the most diverse city in Ireland. I think 20% of the population come from outside of Ireland, which is a big number. Now we're a university town, but it's far more than that, obviously. And just again, another slide on ethnic and cultural background, just to focus on the other white category in that slide for a second. As you can see, you're heading for 500,000 people in the other white category as opposed to white Irish. We have significant numbers of people in our society who come from different places, and by virtue of that, we have significant numbers of families. And just to highlight that for a second, graph is hard to read, but just focus on the top and look at Poland and look at the light blue bar in the middle. And what that refers to is the fact that there are, of all of the Polish households in Ireland, 29,000 of them are households with children. Okay, so what does that mean in terms of their lives? And again, we have some nice work going on in our centre looking at parenting in that context. Okay, so to talk about work for a couple of minutes. This is labour force participation rate. So look at 2006. The blues are the men and the pinks are the women. It's not my slide, by the way. But again, we can see a gap. In 2006, the difference in the labour force participation rate between men and women was about 20%. It was reduced in 2016 to around 15. But it's still the case that there's a significant gap. And a lot of the gap is to do with childbearing. And we can see the differences that makes. Now I'm going to just again highlight, I suppose, in this, the values piece. Most people, 90% of the people in Fine Davis's survey said it's good for a woman to be financially independent in a relationship. And 88% said that both men and women should contribute to the household income. So that's a really, really important point. That sense in which, as a value of the people in that age group, that 20 to 50 age group, this is what they believe. This is a robust survey, by the way. It's good data. It's clear data. Now, I've taken this from the first 5 policy document. And just to say, this is an example of where the state really is trying to come up with evidence-based policy and really use evidence to drive its thinking. So I'll refer you again. This is my slide, the pink arrow for a second. The employment rate of females aged 20 to 44, 67%. 86 for those without children, and 60% for women whose youngest child is aged 4 to 5. Okay? And again, lower again for people parenting alone in that context. Really important point. Employment rate for males, again, far higher. Who does most part-time work? Women do most part-time work, again. So really important stats, and really important to realise the significance and the impact of fertility on work, but also a question, how well are we responding to that? And the area state is doing some work around that. But here I talked about this, and I'm glad, because this is one of my favourites, actually, this whole thing about housework, and I'll refer you to the and we laugh about this, but actually this is really, really, really important, because in the context of family relationships and conflict and all of these things that happen, these are the things that matter. It's when the bin isn't left out, or whatever thing I haven't done this week or this minute or this second. But anyway, really, really important point, just to highlight the importance of the second shift. Lots of scholarship on this, obviously, but some changes. I think that the trend probably, as Bahir is saying, is in the right direction. So I want to talk about poverty for a minute, because poverty is really, really significant in Irish society. These are official stats, and they're from Social Justice Ireland's most recent document. So we'll look at the composition of poverty on the left-hand side for a second. And you can see, so of the 100% of people who are poor, and I on purpose put the green arrow beside the people at work, because this is a really important point. We hear a lot of policy statements about work being so important for poverty alleviation, and of course it is. But the reality, and these are official stats, for 14% of people, or should I say, of all of those who are poor, 14% of them are working. The other stat I would refer you to, and again, the overall population risk of poverty, and that is about being below 60% of median income. Ill and disabled, and we here highlighted it again. If you're ill or disabled, there's a 1 in 3 chance you're going to be poor. And again, relate that to care and other issues, and obviously family stress. And for the likes of us who were interested in children, 231,000 children living in households experiencing poverty in 2017, which is a kind of a shocking and ferocious thing to put up on the screen. One of the things, and this is a little bit of a tricky graph, and the next one is similar, but I want you to try to stay with me for a second on it. What it does is it looks at economic stress, and it's from Dorothy Watson and Chris Whelan, and ESRI at UCD Academics. And what it tries to do is look at economic stress, and it looks at it pre-recession and during the recession. And it draws on growing up in Ireland data again, which is really, really helpful. So what it does is, if you look, you've got society divided up by income quartile. So the bottom, lowest income quartile up to the highest income quartile. So if you follow that. So then if you look at the light balls, they're on the bottom, I don't know, spheres maybe I should call them, the light spheres. And they're the pre-recession. And the dark ones are post-recession, or during recession. So if we look at that for a second and look at the lowest income quartile, 18%, what does that refer to? It means that the risk of being poor if you're in the lowest income quartile. And if you look at the other number, the 57%, people in that income quartile comprise 57% of all of those who are in that economic stress situation. And you can see a gradient. Obviously, you're going to be less likely to be, the risk is going to reduce as you are in a higher income quartile. But what's interesting about the recession, this is one of the arguments in Irish society, well, who did it really affect? And we all had to suffer and all this stuff through austerity. Well, actually, it demonstrates that there was an increase in the risk of people in the higher income quartiles entering poverty over time, and people in those groups actually took more. They were an increasing part of the people who were economically stressed over time. It's an important point. Again, when we talk about universal and provision, and looking this from the family point of view, and again singling out the lone parent side, the same point, the pre-recession on the bottom, the risk and the composition stats. So you can see for a lone parent pre-recession, there was a 22% or 1 in 5 chance of you being poor. During the recession, that became a 4 out of 10 chance of you being poor. But interestingly, if you look at the larger families, that also increased over time significantly. So it's just to think about austerity, poverty, and what that meant for people. And actually, there probably is an argument that it did affect a lot of people in Irish society. What Whelan and Watson and Whelan say is this increasing socioeconomic diversity of households experiencing economic stress points to the relevance of broadly based policy responses incorporating supports for housing, debt relief, childcare costs, and improvements in the quality of public services. It's a really, really significant point when you actually begin to try to understand, well, what does it mean when everybody is suffering the consequences of austerity? Do people recognise this still? So this is from an Irish film written, the script was written by Roddy Doyle. It's called Rose, and it's about homelessness. And I want to talk about service crisis. I'm probably way over time. Am I? How are we doing on the time, Carmel? Yeah, all right, I'll try to go quickly. Okay. I want to talk about homelessness and be here highlighted as a global issue. So if you look on the left-hand side, did people listen to the radio this morning, Focus Ireland's report? Yeah, so again, we know all this, but just to put it up in front of you. Over 10,000 people homeless in the week, April 22nd, 28th, involving almost 4,000 children, involving 1,700 families, and involving 1,000 single parents. So that's the stark reality that faces us. Looking at this in terms of housing need and homelessness, the bigger picture, and obviously what's on the left is right in front of you, but what's on the right is right in front of us as well, because these are people who are not in stable housing situations, who want to be in a better place. And of that, if you look, single persons with children, and couple with or without children, what does it add up to? It's about 38,000 families who currently have housing need. And again, what did they say this morning on the news about the route into homelessness? People who are leaving rented accommodation and so on. So again, these are really critical issues facing us. I know this will sound strange, this is Central Bank of Ireland data. So if you look at the pink bars for a second, what they constitute is around 4%. Okay, so 4% of all of those loan accounts in arrears are actually in arrears for more than 720 days. And these are mortgages on primary residences, okay? Primary residence. These are people's family homes, most likely. What does that look like? It looks like around 29,000 mortgages. And again, go back to the point about who did the recession and austerity hit? Well, probably a lot of people in lots of sections of society. And again, thinking about what is it like being in a family where you're worrying about this every day. And I'm only talking about the 720 days there. So again, really important issues. I want to talk about two other areas of service crisis that we have come across in our work on prevention. The first is mental health. 2,400 children and young people with mental health disorders on the waiting list for child and adolescent mental health services in 2017. 200 waiting for more than 1 year. We had a really excellent policy document in the early 2000s called Vision for Change, which is about the establishment of child and adolescent mental health services throughout the country. 60% of the capacity in terms of our needs for the services there at the moment. And again, what does that result in? Up top, it results in children going into adult units. Not good enough. Services for people with intellectual disabilities. Critically here, this is from the the Health Research Board, should I say, and they have a database on intellectual disabilities. It's not 100% perfect, I know that, but at the same time it tells a story, about 28,000 records. Again, there's massive gaps in terms of the needs for people with intellectual disabilities. Massive gaps in terms of residential, day or residential support places, and again, overall supports. And who provides support? A majority of adults live with their families. So this is the point. This is the reality that we face into when there's a preventative need and it's actually a service that's needed, a mental health need or a disability need, and when you go to get it, it's not there. And just to maybe talk a little bit about caring for a second, because caring is at the heart of this. This is from the CSO. Almost 200,000 people provide unpaid assistance to others in our population. And who provides the majority? Women, but it's a 60-40 breakdown. And what we've done in the past looked at young carers providing, almost 4,000 children providing care. So the whole point about this is that we have to think about how does this all get done? How do we manage all these needs? Where is family in all this, and what do we expect of families? So the key points from the talk: significant values change, demographic change, socioeconomic change, increasing diversity in terms of cultural and ethnic background, in terms of family form relating to ordinary change, but also family breakdown, and also in terms of sexuality, same-sex families, and so on and so forth. But we do have a continuity in values. What I think I've shown is the impact of austerity on families, poverty and services prices, but also, I suppose, the continuing need for families to be carers, to provide the care. I haven't worked out point number 6 yet. It'll get worked on in the new paper that myself and Rosemary write, but it's something about the idea of some families and all families. It's something about the idea that some families are absolutely extremely vulnerable, but it's something also about all families recognising that I know that person, that's my cousin, that's my friend's friend, etc. So it's something about connecting those things up a little bit more. It's also about realising when you have money, you can actually manage these things. You can pay for therapeutic support. You can find the solution through the market. I was originally going to talk a lot about implications in each area, but I hadn't got the time. I already have too much. There's many implications in here for policy and services responses. And we do have a fertile policy landscape, going from the Commission on the Family 20 years ago, Family Support Agency, Family Resource Centre Programme, its investment in marriage counselling and so on. The state has really supported research directly and also through other agencies. Growing up in Ireland, a fantastic resource to us, a fantastic resource. Work by the Family Support Agency, the Department of Employment and Social Protection, formerly the Department of Social and Family Affairs, Social and Family Affairs, which is an interesting point. And again, all of the work around children that the DCY have driven, various social protection measures, and of course the Child and Family Relationships Act, which really tries to deal with some of the issues around new family forms, new reproductive technologies and guardianship. An emphasis on parents and fathers, all in the last 20 years. Lots of good things happening. I suppose if I was to think about it, what does it look like to me on the right-hand side? A lot of emphasis on children, which is good. A lot of emphasis on the job of parents and parenting, which is really good, and absolutely no question that this is a good thing in my view. Question a little bit, just to stand back, if we do kind of try to unpick it a tiny bit, we might say, well, is there an individualist focus track in what Bahira talks about? In some of the, is it about producing the perfect person rather than, well, we'll go there in a second. Is it a bit instrumental? Is it about economy all the time? And actually, is it sectoral? It's this bit, it's that bit, and it's the other bit. So I'm wondering, is there something a little bit that we need to think a bit more about relationality and interdependence? I wonder, what would it look like if you looked at policy and you really started from a values question? And we've talked a lot about values. What are our values? And again, a bugbear for me for many years of doing research, this question of integration and holistic responses. So to conclude and let you go for a coffee, for me, it's a simple argument. Family is a central social institution affecting and affected by society. We have seen major demographic and socioeconomic changes, but family remains significant. We have a post-question mark austerity services crisis that is deeply affecting families. And we have some positive policy developments. I'm wondering, is it time to reflect on the place of family in Irish society and social policy? Because we can put aside the past and past understandings of family and think about it now a little bit differently. And look at it maybe at two levels. One at a values level. And what I mean by values here is, what are people, what are individuals in families? What's their job in families? And what's the job of families for individuals? That's one point. The other point is, what does society want from families? What does it expect from families? And these are really important questions, and they just take a bit of time to talk out and to think out. And we have a structure. We have a new Citizens' Assembly structure, which seems to be a good idea for raising some of these issues. But at a more technical level, maybe family, if we think about it as a potentially useful organising concept for social policy development, for implementation, and critically for integration. So in other words, how do we organise ourselves around universal services? How do we connect better? How do we connect targeted services with universal services more effectively, and so on? How do we join up the income piece with the services piece? Really, really important question. So my final, I suppose, question is, maybe it's time for a second commission on the family. So thank you.